Okay, مساء الخير, guten Abend, and good evening. And I will stick to English actually, if that, assume that's okay with everyone. We are happy to have you here, and I want to thank ALFILM Film Festival for opening and making this possible to be here with you and screen Fida'i film. It became quite demands courage to screen some films in Berlin, in Germany today. And we are happy that we have the possibility to do it in this venue. And I want first to welcome Kamal Aljafari with you for having him here after the screening. Kamal, it's inevitable to not to go directly to Fida'i film and to talk about the philosophy of the image, the techniques, the form. But while I was watching Fida'i film and knowing your body of work, that you began, let's say, for 20 years, it's a bit difficult not to look parallel on the Palestinian cinema brought in the same time and to have in mind or to remember the famous say by Godard about having, after the Nakba, the Israelis as fiction and Palestinians as documentary or archival. In the last 20 years, the Palestinian cinema became more willing to be present, actually. But as I see it, the more the time goes, it became more, let's say, more the fiction film, or the fiction film became more informative, conditioned by news, and especially in the last 20 years, when it has to play a specific role in informing mostly not only foreign audiences, but also Western audiences about the cause, about how political it is, and it was conditioned by the system of producing the films and the way it should be presented, or which narratives should be told. And parallel-wise, in this time, your body of work became more and more, became more far from fiction, or the typical fiction way of producing films, and it rinsed into found images. And sometimes I wonder if the found images find you, or you find the found images. So I would begin with working on found images and the place it has in your work. How do you deal, before the form and the technique, with dealing with found images, hold or lootened or preserved or imprisoned by the colonizer? What would you say about dealing with found images, specifically in these times, actually?
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to talk to you, Saleh. We know each other from Palestine, so it's quite special to talk again together. Yeah, actually, precisely for all the reasons that you kind of mentioned, I decided, or somehow it became like that I wanted to make films that will allow me to be artistically free and avoiding being part of a film system where you have, usually when you make films, you know, you have to write a treatment or a script and the financing and producers, co-producers, and everybody has an opinion. And especially if you are, I mean, in general, it's very difficult to make films for any person, but especially if you are someone who's representing the other, in this case, the Palestinian, which is even more difficult. You find yourself in a situation where you are very somehow limited in what you can do. And I think some people, you know, in Palestine, they went to make fiction films, but fiction films even is worse because it's controlled by narrative. And usually these narratives are as well defined by cliches, defined by a set of ideas and images about who is the Palestinian, etc. Now, of course, there is a way to make fiction films as well, which is radical, but with no money or less money. So, tragically speaking, cinema has been always, controlled by money because it, unlike a painter or a writer, you can do things alone with no financial means or, very with very little. While cinema is an industry, and for these reasons, I wanted to do something which actually gives me the freedom to practice my art without these limitations, and it became by chance actually that I started working with found footage. I have to tell a story that happened to me when I was working on Port of Memory. I was invited to show my first film, The Roof, that I shot. I shot 2 films when I started making films. The Roof in 2004, it's already almost 20 years, and 2009, Port of Memory. So I was invited to show The Roof at the Barbican Center in London, and I checked into my hotel room, and I found the TV on with the welcoming announcement. Hotels don't do this anymore. Welcome, Mr. Aljafari. So it's very disturbing. You just enter a room and somebody is welcoming you on the TV. So I changed the channel, and I went to take a shower and came out of the shower. And on TV, there was a film that I could recognize, but I haven't seen. And it was Delta Force, starring Chuck Norris. A film that as a kid in Jaffa, I saw the shooting of it. And for the first time, I sat and I watched the film. And this is actually the beginning of my interest in found footage, in archival footage, because for me somehow it became all archives. And when I was watching the film, I was waiting for the actors to move so I could see Jaffa, because the film was shot in Jaffa in the 80s. Jaffa, in this case, Jaffa as Beirut during the Civil War. And that moment was really the beginning of my interest in the Israeli cinema, which was shot in Jaffa as early as the 60s. And this was the beginning of my work with archives, with the film Recollection 2015, a film that was made entirely with these fiction film materials, mostly Israeli, but also some American. And I removed all the actors from the foreground because they were standing in my way. And I made a film with the backgrounds of the city of Jaffa. So this experience was for me really such a great freedom, because I realized you can do so much. And in this case, even make a cinema that has a dimension, a political dimension, that for me was such a pleasure, for example, to be able to remove the Israeli actors from the foreground. So this was the beginning.
Yeah, what's interesting actually that unlike Fida'i film, you found actually through the fiction, the Israeli fiction films, your place, your city, or your private and collective crime scene. If I would borrow like Muhammad al-Kurd famous latest publication, Perfect Victims, apparently you got like a perfect oppressor that has this obsession with documenting the crimes in the archive. And in many cases, and especially today, we are living in like hyper archival era, where there's this obsession, especially after the war, with documenting the crimes and pointing sometimes to the place, to the crime scene, and putting the victim behind. In Fida'i film, if I would take it from Fida'i film, I would say there is this will to break the Western hegemony and this actual way of possessing the archive and make reinterpretation for the image through sabotage. The idea of sabotaging founded images. How did that relate to the Palestinian either literature or to the Palestinian reality when we were like at some point described as saboteur or as someone that
I mean, actually, what you're referring to is quite interesting, and this was the beginning of the work that I started on this film. So in Hebrew, the Palestinians who were fighting the occupation, and especially after the formation of the PLO and the guerrilla struggle, these fighters, they were called by the Israeli authorities saboteurs, because I think at the beginning their operations were not intended to harm people, but to sabotage factories and kibbutz and etc. So this was the beginning of this expression, saboteurs. Actually, it's the same. This expression is being used until today, which means basically in Hebrew terrorists. So when I was working with the film and I started watching, and there was a lot of material from that period, I kept listening to all these narrators in Hebrew, defining Palestinians as saboteurs. So I was it's difficult for me to define when I start in the process of making this film, because some of the shots that I have in the film I have been carrying with me since 10 years, but I didn't know what to do with them, since I'm someone who collects and I always collect images. But the beginning of the project was, in fact, also by chance, because a friend of mine shared with me an article from the New York Times, from the archives of the New York Times, from '83, about a bombing that took place in Beirut, actually the scene that we see in the film. And then I started actually getting interested in this subject matter, and I read the memoirs of Anis Sayer that I'm also quoting here, the person that lost his sight and his fingers in this explosion. And I wanted to tell the story of looted archives, and why, in fact, archives or images in general were looted, and what happened to these images. So I started, with the research, and I knew a bit of research that and some little films that were made mostly by Israelis about the looting and about the Israeli invasion of Beirut in 1982. And some of these looted materials appeared from time to time in Israeli documentaries, but always really fragments. And so I started collecting everything that was available, meaning in films that Israelis made. And I got in touch also with some of these researchers. That was actually a terrible experience, because for me, it was quite shocking to understand that they were actually the second looters of the material. Because they didn't want to share anything with me, and they had a pleasure of they kind of had a pleasure of showing me what they have, but not wanting to give it to me. And this is where you understand what it means actually to be occupied and oppressed, and what it means to be a colonizer. It's a kind of personality that, you know, so shocking to face when you sit with a person face to face and you realize you are sitting with colonialism. And it's something that you can read about, but in the practice of like daily life practice, I mean, of course, the daily life of Palestinians being occupied, etc. But when you make a film and you are sitting in front of a person that has photographs that were looted in 82 and also 1967, and they don't want to share that with you, it's quite really shocking to see how far people can go in their oppression. So, nevertheless, I managed. I mean, it's a long story. I don't want to go into details about it, but finally, I managed to get some of this material. But I had a big problem because, you know, I just got traces, you know, like. And these traces were already cataloged by the army, and they had this horrible text that was written on them. So I started in a process, and luckily this was in 2020 during COVID. And many of the Israeli archives, they decided to create online portals to have, Israeli researchers can and viewers can have access during the confinement, during the COVID time, so they can watch and, you know, discover the history. And I discovered that very early, and I basically, for almost 2 years, I enlisted to all their newsletters, so they were informing me about everything that was being updated to the system. And for almost 2 years, I was recording my screen. And then they somehow managed to protect it, and then I found a way to. And I created basically my own archive out of their archives. And this archive was actually, there was no really, a subject matter, meaning that I was looking for something particular, but it was more the feeling I had while watching. And feeling, oh, this could be useful. Or I would see something there that I thought this might complete the narrative that I would like to construct in this film. So that's why, actually, I ended up making 3 films from this material, 2 shorts, and Fidai, while working on Fidai film. So these films were, you know, documentaries, propaganda films, fiction films, and I really love fiction films as an evidence. I think it was the German philosopher Krakauer who wrote that a fiction film is such a reflection on a mentality of a place and of a people. And in that sense, for example, the scene on the beach, the couple on the beach that, you know, I was watching, you know, I watch a lot of really horrible films, like, I spend lots of time, but then you find such a thing, which is such a great scene, because first of all, this film was made in the 60s, I think, and it was premiered in Cannes. That's why it has a French subtitles. And they were talking about their relationship, you know, the couple, and it was for me you know, right away I thought they are talking subconsciously, they are talking about what they have been doing to this country. And this is where, in fact, the sabotage that you are referring to played a really a crucial way to express that by masking them, because for me it wasn't about them. And this dialogue becomes really a dialogue which is expressing a state of mind, and becomes really a crucial part of the film to understand somehow the fictional elements of the Israeli, or in this case Zionist existence in Palestine, going back to Godard. I mean, in the film Our Music, I think it was released in 2005, and there is the wonderful scene in the film where Godard is meeting with film students in Sarajevo, and he's showing them different images of war and destruction. And he would show an image, and he will ask the student, "Where is this?" And the answer would be Sarajevo, and then say, "No, this is an image during the Civil War in the U.S." And at some point, he shows them two images, and he says, "Shot, reverse shot." The image that he's showing them in color is showing Jewish immigrants arriving to Palestine from the sea, and the image that he shows in black and white was of Palestinians leaving Palestine to the sea. And this is where he says, "Shot contra shot." In 1948, the Israelis become the people of fiction, and the Palestinians become the people of documentary, which is in many ways so true.
And somehow in the same actually sequence, talking about techniques and how one can actually sabotage or create a new meaning in the image, you made like counter image play at the same time in the beach scene with black and white 70s archival footage of a Palestinian woman or wife of a Palestinian photographer, talking about this sequence, about this counter image. How did you actually decided how much to tell? And there is like moments of something bizarre at the beginning. You don't know if she's like looking, if she's seeing or not seeing. Talking about this counter image play as tool of sabotage or creating a new meaning in the image, what we could say.
Actually, the work of sabotage was done also against the Palestinian image itself. Because this is a shot that was made of the wife, the sister of Hani Jawhariya, who was a Palestinian cinematographer who was killed during the civil war in the 70s in Lebanon. And it was the image of his sister in her home. She's, you know, extremely sad and mourning the death of her brother. And in this Palestinian film, there was oud music there. And I quite disliked that because there was no need for that. I wanted to watch her, to be with her. And luckily today there is such a good technology for almost everything. So there is a software you could separate the music, the instruments from the voice. And we did that. And what we got, in fact, is much more emotional scene of her. And we could, you know, be with her and be so close to her. And at some point, actually, she says, child, tifl in Arabic. And you couldn't hear all of that while the music was covering everything. But for me, the putting these two scenes together, the couple on the beach and the black and white, it wasn't black and white. I mean, no, it wasn't really a coincidence that the fiction scene on the beach was in color, and this scene of Hinjawariya was in black and white. So it was almost automatic, you know, like I found myself doing it without even thinking. So how much you say, that's a great question, because, you know, this scene, for example, was much longer, and she would say more things about Hani, her brother. But finally, since this film is really working with abstraction, and this is something like that I became more and more interested in, it was against the narrative of the film. You would learn more about this person, but you would lose a lot on the emotional level. So, in a way, this film is taking you into a process of historical truth through reduction, through repetition, and abstraction.
Yeah, in your work, like abstraction is always like a way or a highway to universal feeling where you feel the direct political charge not that present actually. You can relate to it even if you're Palestinian or not Palestinian. And talking about the form and technique, I would love to show the opening of the first clip that we have, the opening of pre-collection, and to talk a bit about the techniques and how to play with image in order to restore the narrative. We can screen it actually.
This is Ben Gurion. I'm very proud of this scene because I removed him and I planted a tree instead of him.
Actually, talking about deleting or like cropping Ben Gurion from the garden scene, he was known by not by hating actually Jaffa, I guess, or there is like a statement like this.
I wanted. Is it working?
Yeah.
Actually, the reason why I erased Ben Gurion in this case was that I found a documentary about his life that was recently discovered and restored by the Israeli TV, and I was visiting Palestine, and by chance it was being shown on TV, and I watched it, and there is a wonderful opening sequence where he arrives to Palestine, to Jaffa from the sea, and he walks around in the old city of Jaffa, and he says there, because it was a kind of reenactment of his arrival to Palestine. And he says there, I came to Jaffa and I hated it because it was an old place with history and it reminded me of Minsk, his city. It was something really bizarre because probably he thought when he came, I mean, this is the godfather of the Israeli state, he thought probably that Palestine is empty. And he arrives to Jaffa, and there's a city which is a couple of thousand years old. And that's how actually I thought, okay, then I will remove you from the image. And Yeah, you know, the thing is about working with found footage and with archival footage is so inspiring because you find amazing things that you cannot even think about. And you can study patterns. You can, like what happened in the making of Fidai film, I could really study the patterns that were, you know, repeating again and again, like the collective punishment, for example, that we see the beginning of the film, the first section, which is mostly about the British period. We see the practices that the British brought to Palestine, and it's really very important to understand that, because without it, it's impossible to understand the Palestine and what is happening in Palestine today. Because the British in Palestine, I think they stayed less than 30 years. And they brought with them the most experienced troops that they had in Ireland in order to suppress the Palestinians. That's why the connection between Ireland and Palestine is coming from this background. And according to the book of Rashid Khalidi, I don't know if some of you had read it, 100 Years of War on Palestine, I think he says there something like that during that period, the British army injured and killed almost 10% of the population of Palestine. Now, what the British did, and I have to talk about this to understand the Palestinian situation, during that period, and we see traces of that in the film because we see already the collective punishment, the way they were arresting the men, setting homes of people in fire as a collective. If a resistance comes from a neighborhood, you collectively punish the entire neighborhood or destroy their homes, etc. Exactly what the Israeli authorities would do right after in 1948 until today. It's the British emergency laws that are being used. So during that period, the British authorities, the British mandate authorities, almost in every city, a little town in Palestine, they built a police station. And in every big city, they built a prison. And these institutions, these places are being used actually until today. All the prisons in Palestine are British built. I don't think that they built new prisons. Maybe
Who knows? Now they are building more.
Exactly, maybe. But they kind of expanded them. But actually, what was really because what was the aim of the British mandate is to prepare the people of Palestine for independence. But actually, they were preparing them for disposition and for destruction and control. So, again, going back to the film, when I was working with the film, I could see these patterns. You know, they were repeating themselves. It's the same thing. The arresting the men, the way they were tied together, it was really coming again and again, and you could see the similarities of the practice. And at some point, I didn't care who was doing that, and that's why the film works with abstraction, because. With abstraction, and this is something that in this project I understood better and better. With abstraction, you can humanize people, and abstraction is universal. So, by not giving the viewer the exact information where we are and who's doing what, actually, it has an emotional effect that is much stronger and effective, and for me also cinematic and poetic, than mentioning, oh, this is what the British were doing, and you write it down. We are in the city of Jaffa, and then you write it down. And then the same, what's happening after 48, these are the Israelis, this is the occupation of Gaza. The film really removes all of that and stays with the images and what the images are telling us.
And actually, looking at your body of work, like Fidai Film, but also Recollection and Unusual Summer, all the films that you did with found images, there is always this feeling, and also in Port of Memories and The Roof, there is also always this feeling that there is like a depth with memory that you are trying like all the time to pay with a private memory, and then it goes to like a more collective or general memory. My question is regarding the practices that you do in form and image. I wanted like to begin with Recollection because it's like it founded your begin and style with found images. The decision like to walk into the image itself, like in Recollection, or to work with like a fixed camera, 24 hours fixed camera in Unusual Summer. It could be sometimes you have these decisions of making the new interpretation of image through either getting like playing with the focus or with the repetition itself or with the sound. How do you decide for each film which kind of like sabotage you would make? If we talk about Recollection at the beginning, there was an intimate feeling that you're going back to the neighborhood or to your private place through walking into the image and having sound maybe from the city itself.
I think each project, each film, yeah, somehow inspires the language that I ended up using. For example, in the case of Recollection, it was really this project that I wanted to remove the actors because they were standing in my way. And I wanted to focus on the background. And this is where I started playing with this idea. I had a very good friend. I told him, I was telling him, yeah, I want to be able to walk inside the image, like not to zoom, but really to have the sensation that we are walking. So, and he was a very good programmer, and he told me we can program that. We can even create a style. So that's why when we have a zoom, like a walk inside the image, and we create a kind of a style of an amateur, not really a professional camera person. He's like this person cannot really film well. He zooms and he walks, and he's not that precise. Simply because in this project, the idea was that I am returning to Jaffa like I'm returning to it in my dream, because all these places that you see in the film, they don't exist in reality. They only exist in like virtually, like in images. Anyway, so and then while I was actually collecting for making this film that is about the background, I found by chance, it's something that didn't came to my mind, there were so many people there, so many, because just to mention that in these Israeli fiction films, Palestinians did not exist. They don't exist, not even as extras. They basically were uprooted second time. First time in reality, second time in fiction. I'm talking about this period between the 60s and the 80s. Later on, the Palestinians will appear in Israeli cinema in different manners. But in this case, in the case of, and most of these films were shot in Jaffa, so I found a lot of Palestinians actually. They were not part of the narrative. They were just walking by in the background, because many of these films were B movies. So they shot in the street, and they couldn't control everything. And so you would find, I even found my uncle. I was one day watching a film, and suddenly I see my uncle passing by. So then the film became about all these people that somehow smuggle themselves into the image. And it became a film about them. And I found so many of them that at some point I thought they were waiting for me all these years to make a film with them. You know, they were there hiding, you know.
We have a video of this, if we can show a little, like 1 minute
Yeah.
of the figures that you found. Clip number 1, the second part, please.
So one language of this film was actually I projected the films in the cinema, and I did I took snapshots of details that I saw. So almost 30% of the film is this kind of photography, because this person is also taking pictures. So there were just kids in the background. For the project itself, I think I did something like 25,000 postcard size images, which is basically became then like a whole album of the city and all these people that I found in the background. Yeah, this is a scene that I you know, it becomes really very emotional, because I was playing with this idea that as I mentioned before, that all these people were waiting for me all this time. And I wanted to create a scene where they all march together. There's no sound? Can we have sound?
We could do one without.
Oh, yeah, but just, can you play it just a second? Thank you.
It reminds like of marches of Exodus, like of it's so emotional, and it's very surprising that you can find this kind of thing in Israeli fiction films.
Yeah, so actually this was a final scene of an Israeli fiction film shot in the 80s in Jaffa. And for whatever reason, they let the inhabitants, the Palestinians of Jaffa, there was a kind of march, and they let them also march. But they were in the background. That's why they were all out of focus. And I mean, many of these people that you see, that's why, you know, I have more, you know, personal and emotional connection with the images, because there are people that I know, you know, children from my childhood, that, but, you know, you watch this film and you see them all there. And this is where, in fact, I understood when I was working on this project that, you know, cinema is such a tool, an amazing tool of memory and of existence, and if you want, of resistance.
And also in the technique on form of like repetition and coloring, you made also such a good action film actually, like Paradiso, using the military archive of the Israelis and making it like mockery, sarcastic, and actually putting all these serious patriarchal videos of Israeli army either doing like army exercises or reenacting them. In this case, if you could tell us, using the archive in like a very like mockery or sarcastic way, how did you work on this like part of playing with the archive?
You know, I came across this material by chance. You know, when I was collecting for Fidai Film, you know, I watched a lot of things, and one of the things that I came across because of this wonderful online portals, because of COVID, was army films, films that were actually commissioned, directed, acted, and distributed by the army. And they were not documentaries in a sense that, you know, filming of training. No, they were proper fiction films, meaning a whole unit is fighting in the desert against the enemy. What was interesting in all these films, and I collected quite a lot of them, and I think they began making these films in the 60s, and then there was a boom of these films after 1967 of the you know the success that they had, and the army became something almost yeah. So there were a lot of these films. Anyway, one thing that, again, going back to patterns, what was interesting about the images that I found, that in many of these films, especially the color one, all the people that would appear, they had sunburn because they were shooting in the desert for a long time. And this is where I thought I should intensify that, and I made them pink. So my intervention in this case, that's why I was saying, you know, like the material itself inspired me to do that. You know, if they were not looking the way they looked, maybe I didn't have this idea. So it is really a kind of work, and I think it's more kind of clear and fully defined in the case of Paradiso, the idea of turning the image against itself, of finding something there that actually quite tells the opposite. The other thing that was interesting in these films was that they were always fighting an enemy that is not to be seen. So they would shoot, you know, they have sometimes a kind of narration, and they would say, attack, the enemy is behind the hills. The silent hill, because they don't speak, you know, so they don't exist. So and for me, it was actually the meaning was even in this case even the opposite, that this enemy is undefeatable. You cannot see it. You keep making wars and wars, and there were so many of these films, and they have the same kind of instructions: attack the enemy behind the hills. But you don't see anyone. So the film became about all of that, you know, about the senseless nature of war, any war.
It seems as if they were combating each other actually.
Yeah, at some point they start, because in the montage you can do wonderful things. They starting fighting each other, exploding each other's tanks. And yeah, it was fun.
If you can show us like the first minute of number 3, please. This is from Paradiso. This exact what you described, the silent hills. Number 3, please. With sound.
So you see the color when when I made the DCP, the color grade, the DCP person called me. Why is that? There's a problem with the colors. I said, no. I even colored the balloon. It was actually white. So. Yeah, this was a lot of fun, actually. I enjoyed this film a lot because we have sound. Because when do you have a chance to make like such a big budget film with like army and soldiers? I mean, but yeah,
You have all the elements of a good action film actually here.
yeah. I mean, in this case, really the work on the color grading and sound was so like essential. I mean, I'm lucky to work with amazing people that help like work with me on these projects. And the music that we have, etc. I mean, none of this music is from the original, as you can imagine. I mean, the army wouldn't use Dance Macabre to, you know, as a soundtrack. Actually, they like to. And it was so absurd because they in many of these films they use jazz a lot.
That's original actually.
Yeah.
And after looking at this like body of work dealing with found images and archive, do you think that it's time to make another time like a fiction film? Is there something that you would think that would be contributing, or something that you would like to depict in a fiction film after dealing with so much deep archive, found images, and this style of found images in general?
It's a good question. I mean, I almost since 12 years I wanted to make a fiction film that I'm planning to shoot next year. But yeah, it's a good question. What is it that I want to tell and show that I couldn't in while making these films in you know, found footage films? I mean, that, you know, of course, you know, when you work with found footage, you have a limitation, but this limitation with time, I learned that it is actually quite exciting because you can somehow, rework the image in a way where limitation becomes a strength, where limitation, in fact, inspires you to be more artistic, to be more radical, to be more daring, like in the case of this project, like with the color grading, etc. But yeah, I mean, I think there are many things that I want to say, and I think that shooting again, going and shooting my own images again, is something that is challenging for me now, because I got used to the idea that I have film footage, I don't have to shoot, and I have them, and then I work with them. It's so comfortable. You don't have to deal with the whole system, and shooting and crews, and many people who,
Especially in Palestine, if you want to
as
shoot
well,
it.
and the difficulties of shooting in Palestine, even today more difficult than before. But I think it's healthy to change and to try something different.
I would like to continue to talk about also the future projects and other motivations or things that you have in mind, but I would love to open the question to the audience. If someone has a question, would love to ask Kamal. Feel invited to ask any question you want. Yes, please.
Kamal, I'm just interested in how you work with copyrights, for example, for recollection, these Israeli films and Chuck Norris and so on. How you deal with this?
You want my honest answer?
No, I mean in matters of if they can sue you, or if they, because
So, in Fidai film, I was asked this question many times, and then spontaneously I found myself saying such a, making such a statement by saying, I don't believe in copyrights, I believe in liberation rights. But this is philosophy, But practically speaking, when I worked on recollection, I did an interesting discovery that, according to the German copyrights law, if you change the image so much, like I did, I removed the actors, I created a new, I reframed, I colored, the image becomes, so to say, new.
okay.
It becomes mine. Now, that doesn't mean that the original copyrights holder cannot sue you. They can always do it. And I was, at the time, I was worried about two films, Chuck Norris, because it was an American Hollywood production, and I removed Chuck Norris and all of that. But luckily, nothing happened. Because, finally, you have really to study the film. You have to go back and study each of these images and to find exactly where they come from. And it's a lot of work, I think. But, of course, this could happen. In the case of Fidai film, most of the material was looted anyway. Yeah. So I took the freedom to use it, and then this becomes the freedom in general in the making of the film by appropriating materials from Israeli archives in general. Yeah. So, yeah.
Hello. I have two questions at least. One is concerning the color red in your film. In the film we saw, to me it looks like blood. And what does it mean in the face of Israelis? I have to ask. And the other question, you said you want to make it more emotional with abstraction. isn't there already enough and too much emotion in all this conflict and all this history? And shouldn't we reduce emotion and come back to more clear head and try to find solutions for future? This is my question, or two questions.
I don't think that. Of course, the images. For example, the looted images had many problems in them. For example, that most of them did not have sound, or they were in very bad shape. Very compressed, and emotionally speaking, even if you see something that is violent, you don't feel much. But the idea of reworking the images, and in this case, masking people, and I did it, as a matter of fact, with the Israeli figures and also with Palestinians. The two different, the red color and the masking played two different roles, but I did it in both cases. It did create, in fact, not only an emotional impact, but also a contemporary meaning for the image. And it became an image of now. And especially if you watch the film today, the film we finished 2 years ago in July 2023, so it has nothing to do with what happened as of October. But of course, it's impossible to separate while watching the film between what you're watching and today. But I think that also happens because of the work we did with the image, by masking, with all these interventions that we did. And these interventions, they were not scientific in a sense that sometimes, they were done just to create a poetic feeling, like at the beginning with the sun, to have the red dot over it. Or, for example, the shot that we see of landscape in the West Bank, that in fact the camera was positioned just next to the machine gun. And beside putting the red color in the valleys, I thought it's also good to scratch over the machine gun. In this case, was an act of sabotage. So there were many elements that this film worked with that were abstract, and this abstraction, as I said before, really made things universal and also human. Because, again, going back to your question about the feeling that one have while watching images, unfortunately, and especially in the case of the Palestinians, there has been such a long process of dehumanization that even if you see a dead person or an injured person or a destruction, sadly, people don't feel. Or at least that's how the media find a way to arrange it in a way that we are left cold. So these interventions really helped a lot in creating the impact that I wanted with these images, with the violence that we saw in these images. And the violence that we saw was really, as I said, was repeating itself again and again in the same manner, the same methods. That's why, for example, the end scene, the epilogue, we decided this was a visual effect to add the fire, because it was, when we were editing, it was really the period when Israeli settlers would attack Palestinian villages and set their properties in fire, and people were killed, etc. And it was somehow clear that this will get worse and worse. So these interventions were really helping to have the emotional impact finally. It wasn't enough to keep the image as it is.
Yeah, thank you very much it's very interesting to listen to all your processes. I have two questions. One is referring a bit to what you just talked about. I think, I mean, we talked about, or you talked a lot about the sabotage, but also a lot of images were not sabotage at all, visually at least, just on the sound level, and a lot of images were very violent images, like dead bodies. And I mean, there's a lot of, I think, discussion around, showing these dead bodies again without knowing so much about the person, the heritage of the image. How I wanted to hear how you navigate those questions. And second question would be, I think there was a part, maybe I'm wrong, but that was using artificial intelligence to manipulate the image when it was merging, like in the second part of a film. My question would be also what...
I didn't use any AI in this
no,
one, but I don't know which image are you
this
referring
when maybe someone from the audience can help when the images are merging into each other.
Oh, this was just was done in the editing. No machine.
Okay.
It was like a montage.
Okay.
The flashes in color.
No, it was not flashes. Does someone else knows what I mean?
But anyway, there was no use of AI.
Okay. Okay, then yeah.
This is a very good question because when I was working with the film and I came across all these dead bodies and because sadly the history of Palestine and the Palestinian people is a history of massacres. And the images that I showed, especially in the third part of the film, they were mostly coming from. There's also dead bodies at the beginning during the British Mandate, and then 48. You see the dead old man on the street. But and of course, there were massacres in 1948 in the occupation of Palestine, but we don't have images of that. And we have images of the massacres that happened to Palestinians during two periods. During Black September in Jordan, and during the civil war in Lebanon, and the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. The one that most people know is Sabra and Shatila, but there were many others. Sorry?
Yeah,
Taliza, and there were many others, and then the question comes: do you show these images? And I wasn't ever actually a person that wanted to show these images in the way they are, like they are so sad and violent and horrible. Entire families killed in the street and thrown into the rubbish dump, But I thought I have to show it because this is what has been happening to the Palestinians since the occupation of their homeland and since the Nakba. They went through one catastrophe after the other, one massacre after the other, at different hands. And in fact, these images that we see in the film, we see them every day today. But in a much bigger scale, in a scale of, shockingly, in a scale of a final solution that is being planned and conducted against the Palestinian people. So we have to show it because this is what's happening and people have to see it.
I have a question behind English. Yeah.
Thank you, Kamal, for your film and the talk. It really enlightened me what you said in the beginning about the relation between documentary sabotage and fiction, and I never thought about that But what I wanted to ask is, what you said in the beginning is that one of the main reasons that you turned to found footage was kind of the constraints and the limits of the film industry, and that you were looking for your ways of pursuing artistic freedom through found footage. But I wanted to ask, like, if you actually had the means, if you would not if you would not have the limits of the film industry, but if you actually had now the means of production to make the kind of fiction film that you would love to make, could you imagine there's some kind of fiction film that you've ever thought about, which you would love to make?
Actually, I have many projects. But you know, going back to this idea of wanting to make this fiction film, and actually finally we managed to finance the film. We will shoot next year. But meanwhile, while I was actually planning to shoot this film, I discovered another material, found footage, that I'm making a film with now. So it looks like I'm not able really to escape from this, you know, and free myself from the work with found footage. But you know, each of these projects has its meaning, you know, and when it happens for a good reason. And when it comes to you, and I really truly believe that when ideas come to you, you have to embrace them, you have to take them. And usually, I'm not really choosing, you know, like in the case of Unusual Summer, I came across material that my father made. He installed a surveillance camera to find out who was breaking his car. And I ended up making this film with this footage, just with one shot of the corner of the street. And then again, I discovered the whole neighborhood passing by the car, and then I make a film that is investigating first, who was the person throwing the stone, and then it becomes a film about, you know, the poetry of daily life. But I wasn't planning that, and the same with the film that I'm doing now. So I don't know, things happen, you know, and I think in many ways when you are involved and I think emotionally involved in what you are doing, things happen accordingly. Things find you.
Thank you so much for a really, really inspiring film, and more so the talk. I mean, I've so much happening, and so much. I've been taking notes and so much learning from your talk. So thank you so much for this. I have just two things that caught my attention in the film were from the archival footage or the found footage. One was the ITS reportage, the news report of the 1983 bombing, and it was very interesting to see how vocabularies and grammars are very similar to today. Not as bad,
sorry?
very similar to today.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this now because you said that the film was done before October 7th, so finished July 23. It was just very interesting. It's not as bad as today. It's not as bad as Germany. You know, England is a bit more refined, but still dozens dead. You know, no one killed, dozens dead. You know, the same vocabularies and stuff. And also, I found it very interesting from the footage that you found. Speaking of Salah's comment about the enemy, the documents, the footage of At-Talazzuz, the gleeful destruction of the city, and then you have a European woman, presumably Jewish, standing with a baby, posing on the rubble of what would become her new home, probably. And I found that very interesting in how you played with it. But my all of that comes to what you called sabotage, turning the image against itself. And for me, it was very interesting that you chose Fidei as the name. And I'm wondering why Fidei? Of all the words that could express and describe sabotage or subversive action, muqawama, resistance, you chose Fidei, and that was very interesting for me. And I wanted to ask you why. And the second was to do with the soundtracks, especially the soundtracks that we just heard now with the marching, but also the scene with Akka. I wanted to ask you what those are and how did you come to that? So the name and the soundtracks.
But
Thank you.
just to talk about the woman that you mentioned, you know, with the baby. I mean, this was after the destruction of the occupation of this was Jaffa, Jewish immigrants were arriving, to Palestine, mostly from Europe. They were, discriminated against. They were massacred in Europe. They were killed in Europe. And they found themselves, whether they were Zionists or not, they found themselves in Palestine. And for me, when I see this image, it's so so tragic, because this person who's probably coming from Poland, looking at her features, or somewhere in Eastern Europe, has a baby, and now she lives. She just arrived probably 6 months or a couple of weeks ago, and they just put her in this destroyed neighborhood in Jaffa, in the destroyed and occupied homes of Palestinians that became now refugees. And this is really the tragedy of Palestine. So you see her there, and she's kind of happy to be in this place, and it's bizarre, because when, as a Palestinian, you look at this image, you see something else. Like, it's so unbelievable that this, so to say, two fates now meet in the destruction. And it continues until today. It's not that it was and there was a solution for this tragedy. No, it continues. It's like endless cycles of destruction. So the question about Fidai, because every time I was making a film, there was so much struggles that I have to sacrifice my time, my life, And I thought, okay, finally, the film is a Fidai. Because in Arabic it says ALFILM amal Fidai, which means the film is an act of Fidai. Or Fidai film, because it's true. To make a film is like you sacrifice everything, But finally, because this play between the sabotage and the Fidai, the Israelis call these Palestinians saboteurs. The Palestinians call themselves Fidaiyin, and I chose it's a Fidai film.
And the part about the music, he told about the song that was played في متحف الأيام in the Museum of Days. He was interested to know what was this song actually.
It's really a crazy story, because I found this song in the archive of the Israeli TV. And this was a film, a propaganda film that was commissioned by the Arabic
radio or
broadcasting. They created I think already in the
after 1967 there was like the radio of Israel in Arabic in order to.
This was the TV, and they made films. They made films to promote the idea of the coexistence. That now the Arabs, because they are not referred to as Palestinians, they are just Arabs. They live peacefully, and and they show. It was an Akka actually, this film, and they commissioned a young man by the name of Samih Al-Qasim to write the song. And I think Samih Al-Qasim was 19 or something. And for me, this was such an act of sabotage that Samih Al-Qasim did. Because the film is a propaganda film, like everybody is living together peacefully, Arabs and Jews, and they work, they eat hummus, and
modernists with the
and all of that. And then there's this scene, because the film is portraying the life of a musician. So you follow him in the film, etc. It's like a half an hour film. And then there is this song that was written by Samih Al-Qasim, which is like against everything that this propaganda film is showing you and wanting you to believe. And for me, this was another example of this sabotage that you can do from within. And it ended up becoming really such a crucial element in the structure of the film, where the film begins and ends with it. And again, this is one of the wonderful things about working with archives, that you find things that you don't know about their existence, but you have to look. You have to spend time to watch and watch. Yeah, there was another question.
These were the questions, actually, right?
That's all.
Yeah, this was the part of the. Yeah, that's the music in the march scene in Recollection.
This is, you know, the Egyptian composer Suleiman Gamil. This is a music from by him. He did the music. I had a period where I really was obsessed in listening to his music, because he did kind of modern music depicting the life of the pharaohs. So it was all songs expressing that period in Egypt, but they were modern music, using a lot of flute and actually I used I used him twice. Once in Recollection, and then second time in Paradiso, and it was just a flute, because I wanted music that actually is the music of the invisible enemy. And every time the army is attacking the invisible enemy, this flute comes.
We can take more questions when there is like a last question that we can take. Yeah. Okay, I would end with a question, actually, Kamal, about the notion that we mentioned at the beginning about sometimes the images find you and you don't find them. Would you tell us maybe something about your next project, if we can know a bit, if you're like ready to share this with us, because I think it's really unbelievable.
It's truly unbelievable, because I was looking at, tapes of my first film, The Roof, and because I read somewhere that after 20 years, you have to. Mini DVs, they
get corrupted.
They get damaged,
Yeah.
and suddenly I had some time, and I said, okay, I'm gonna digitize everything. So while doing some order, I saw one tape, one mini DV, and it was written on it. It is written on it in Arabic with Hassan in Gaza, Ma Hassan fi Gaza. So I saw that. I said, this is so strange. What is this tape? Maybe someone gave it to me. So I went to the company where I wanted to digitize the tapes, and I asked him to, first thing I told him, please put this. I want to know what it is. And then it got stuck in the player, of course. And then he told me, yeah, come tomorrow, because he had to open the player and to type it and etc. and to fix it and type it together. And then the following day, I couldn't sleep that night, because I was like thinking, what is this tape? And I was hoping that it's not going to be damaged or... Anyway, I came the following day, and the person, he did a great job, and he told me, I fixed it, we can watch. And I'm watching, and they were shot in Gaza, in a car, and then on the beach, and I had no idea what they were. Until a moment that I saw myself in the mirror of the car, holding the camera. And then slowly I remembered that I went to Gaza 24 years ago, in the year 2001. I did a trip there. I crossed the whole Gaza Strip from north to south. And I took these tapes with me when I went to study in Cologne, but I never looked at them. I forgot about them. And it's so crazy that I never saw these tapes all these years. I moved, countries, apartments, and I always had these tapes with me, and they chose to appear only now. And that's the film I'm making with Hassan in Gaza.
We will be waiting for this film. Thank you, Kamal, so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presence here, and we can also continue outside having our talk. We have to leave the place. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.
Thank you.